Okay, thanks, Philip. Okay, Jack, are we live yet?
You're live streaming now, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
It's now 10:36, so we'll formally start the meeting of the Police and Crime Panel. The first item on the agenda is election of Chair of the Police and Crime Panel. Can I have any nominations, please?
Yes, Jane, I'd like to nominate Councillor David Riley as the Chair.
Thank you. Is that seconded?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? If there are no other nominations, are all panel members happy that David Riley be elected as Chair of the Police and Crime Panel? If you put their hands up, please, members of the panel. Thank you. Councillor Riley, congratulations, you're elected as Chair of the panel for the following year.
Thank you, Jane. And can I just say thank you to my colleagues on the panel for re-electing me. I'm very grateful. And please be assured that I intend to support you with all of my skill and ability. That brings us to agenda item number 2, which is the appointment of the Vice Chair for the Warwickshire Police and Crime Panel. I would like to nominate Councillor Derek Paul. Do we have any other nominations, please?
Thank you. I'll speak to you soon. Bye. No, sorry, Chair. No, I was going to second. That was what I was going to do. I thought you were at that point. No, I have no other nominations.
So we have Councillor Pete Gilbert seconding. Do we have any other nominations to be Vice Chair of Police and Crime Panel, please? That's no responses heard. So can we please move to a vote then? It's been proposed and seconded that Councillor Derek Paul becomes Vice Chair, or continues as Vice Chair, should I say, of the Police and Crime Panel. Can I please take a show of hands? Jane, I've got some sort of a system problem here where I can't see any hands on the system.
Councillor Paul's been elected as Vice Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Derek, congratulations. Would you like to say anything to your colleagues?
I'd just like to thank them for nominating me and seconding me again, and I'll work closely with you as much as possible. And thank you all the panel members for endorsing me. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Right, that appointment moves us to agenda item number 3. The first agenda item being apologies. Do we have any apologies, please?
Chair, we have apologies from Mr. Andy Davis, independent member.
Thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, it gives me pleasure to inform you that Mr. Gavin MacArthur from the Warwickshire Police Audit Standards Committee is joining us online today as well. As you know, as a panel, we have started a new partnership with the Joint Audit and Standards Committee, and I very much look forward to receiving feedback from Mr. MacArthur. Thank you and welcome, Gavin.
Thanks very much, David.
Right, members, can I remind you all to mute your microphones? And can I ask, does anybody have any disclosures of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest, please? That's nothing received. Jane, can I confirm that you haven't received anything?
I haven't received anything, Chair.
Thank you. That therefore moves us on to agenda item number 3, which is the minutes of our meeting of the 18th of June. I'll take these minutes first for matters of accuracy. Colleagues, can I please ask for any comments on the first page of the minutes, which is page 5 of our document. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, page 14, and finally page 15. Colleagues, I've not heard any feedback, so can I ask whether you are happy for me to sign these minutes as a true and accurate record?
I move that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Paul.
Councillor Bradley's got her hand up, Chair.
Thank you, Jenny.
Oh, no. She's put her hand down.
It was to approve the minutes, Chair.
Thank you, Jenny. Much appreciated. Okay, then, colleagues, I will sign them as a true and accurate record. Deb, can we go back to matters arising from those minutes, please? Or shall I do them? So, matters arising from those minutes are page 10, which is the discussion about the disproportionately high rate of BMA personnel leaving Warwickshire Police. That, Commissioner, is an agenda item on your report, so we've determined that we will pick that up when you deliver your report. Are you okay with that, Philip?
Yes, David, fine.
Okay, thank you, Philip. On page 12, we have the arrangement between the Joint Audit and Standards Committee and the Police and Crime Panel in terms of an agreement for working in unison, including lines of engagement to ensure compliance with statutory roles. Deb, do you have anything to say about that?
Chair, there is an informal agreement that either the chair of the Joint Audit and Standards Committee or the vice chair will attend each meeting, normally rotating between the two.
Okay, thank you
for
for
the public
mentioning this.
sessions only.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, can I just confirm that you are all in support of that arrangement? By a show of hands.
That arrangement is supported, Chair.
Thank you, Jane. And then finally on matters arising, we have page 13, which is about the recruitment of a new independent member, and that is an agenda item. So, colleagues, with your agreement, I'll move on from the minutes and matters arising, unless anybody has anything they'd like to say. No, thank you, nothing heard. So that takes us to public speaking. Do we have any public questions?
There have been none received, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Deb. That takes us on to agenda item 4, which is the report of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Philip, over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody, and it's a pleasure, of course, to attend your meetings, and you have your statutory duty to hold me to account, and this is your opportunity to do that. So I think we're all probably getting used to these Teams, Zoom, Skype meetings now, and in my view, they are working pretty well throughout certainly all the bodies that I serve on, and I think the business is being conducted as efficiently as it would have been in normal times, but plainly there's not the eye to or face-to-face contact, which is often helpful in a meeting. But I think this is very much the next best thing. I'll do my very best to interact with you all, answer questions, and do what you ask of me. So I'm afraid we've got quite a long report from us this year, this meeting, but it covers my sort of updated report as of today. There's then the draft annual report for the last financial year 2019-2020, and then we thought it would be helpful to also put in some of the scrutiny questions we've been asking the force on the first quarter up to June 2020, and then indeed we've supplied written answers from Chief Superintendent Ben Smith in local policing in Warwickshire to those questions. So quite a lot there, and I hope that you have found it interesting reading. So going back to the report, the annual report is actually a draft document, councillors, and we're really waiting for any particular comments that you may or may not have before it goes public. But plainly, it's pretty well in a final draft situation. I think it goes through all the responsibilities and roles that I have. It obviously reflects the priorities in the police and crime plan, and we talk a little bit about collaboration, regional, national policing, finance, and all those items that are in there. So anyone who's got any questions, I think yours, and there will be a few, I'll be very happy to answer those if I can. The Warwickshire Police Establishment, I'm just interested to get an update on that, which I've done this week. So, Warwickshire Police officers, between March 19 and March 20, in other words, the last financial year, Warwickshire Police recruited 216 new officers into the force. This was a 14% increase, which is nearly double the rate of the next highest police force in England and Wales. The current strength now stands at 1,029, budgeted to rise by the end of this financial year in April 2021 to 1,059. I'm doing some research, but I'm pretty sure this will be the most officers Warwickshire Police has ever had in its history. So those officers, what are they doing? We now have the two new rural crime teams, one in the north, one in the south. That is also mirrored with two new vehicle crime teams, one in the north, one in the south. A new county-wide child abuse and exploitation team, enhanced safer neighbourhood teams, more detectives, and of course more 999 response officers. And it's actually the new officers, the new recruits, the first thing they do is go into our response when plainly they can be mentored and they can learn the job of that practically and on the ground. So that's the current position on officers. I think we've got a gender item according to your programme about diversity, equality and inclusion in the next meeting, but David Patterson, my office, has looked into this, and sort of section 5 of my report goes into some detail about BAME personnel joining and leaving the force with some reasons. I hope you find that interesting, and the fact that the positive action team is there, it talks a lot about their work, is producing dividends, and I think probably the Chief Constable may say a little bit about those BAME candidates in the pipeline to be recruited. We then go on to the performance part, which I have referred to, and happy to answer any comments on that. In our own office, I think you are now aware that we have appointed Polly Reid as the new Chief Executive of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner in Warwickshire. There is a procedure we have to go through, although she's been selected by me. There is a procedure to go through with the panel, and David, I suspect, and I know you've spoken about this during your pre-meeting, and we'd be obviously very interested to hear how you want to conduct that process. I think that's probably all I need to say on opening remarks. It's an interesting challenge financially over the next 2 or 3 years. Plainly, we are subject to the challenges of COVID-19. Thankfully, the force itself has been pretty resilient, as have the staff, with not too many employees catching the virus. But of course, we're all caught up, as are all organisations. If there's a family member who's self-isolating, they have to, and all those sorts of things. And if indeed somebody self-isolated, one of our officer or staff teams, they all have to self-isolate. So it does have a knock-on effect. And I've been questioning and meeting with the Chief Constable every week to understand what the resilience of the force has led on to discussions about priorities. I'm sure you'll ask the Chief Constable about the enforcement of various guidelines and rules around COVID and social distancing, etc. And I have been asking those questions every week. I've also talked about health and well-being and morale of the force with the Chief Constable, as that is pretty critical to Warwickshire Police to be able to be effective. I had a call with the Home Office yesterday, principally about the spending review and finance going forward. All we are told is the budget, as everybody now knows, has been delayed from November. We don't know when there will be a budget. And that budget would, of course, set out the spending priorities and total amounts to be allocated to each government department. And from that, the Home Office can then extrapolate what can be spent on local forces and what can be put into organisations like the National Crime Agency and other centralised and regional operational police teams. The only thing we haven't managed to extract out of it, which is quite helpful, is they are still proposing to give us a 3-year settlement on revenue and a 4-year settlement on capital. So that will indeed help us to look at our medium-term and to be able to get that, if you like, lined up and then be able to plan improvements and other changes to the force and indeed my office. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. I think that's all I need to say as an opening remark, other than congratulations to you and to Councillor Poole on being re-elected, and I look forward to working with you at least up until May, when the election happens, and hopefully beyond. But we'll see. That is down to the voters of Warwickshire, not to me. So back to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Philip. We have a series of questions for you, Philip. So how we'll do this is I will lead the page number and invite colleagues to ask if you're ready.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can I take you to page 2 of your report, which is page 19 of the document pack, which is the section on diversity, equality, and inclusion. Can I just say we can hear background noise from your home, Philip, at the moment?
I know. That's my other half, also on a Teams meeting. But yeah. So I will mute myself as much as I possibly can.
Okay, brilliant. Just shout loud, Philip. It always works. Right, and we appear to have lost the Commissioner.
I'm here. I can hear you.
Okay, you're frozen on screen, so as long as you're here. Right, Ian, would you like to pose your question to the Commissioner?
Yes, thank you. This is about section 5 on diversity, equality and inclusion. Wonderful to see all the work that's been going on, but the tables raise a couple of questions. So the first one is that the first table splits personnel into police officers, staff and PCSO. That's just for 3 months of this year. The second table for the last 5 years just says BME police officers. So that obviously raises the question for other police staff and PCSOs, what's happened there? So if we can have data on that, that would be fantastic. The other bit that's not about BME, but is about a recruit retention, is that the total personnel leaving in just the first 3 months of this year, if I've read it correctly, is 17 officers, 52 staff and 2 PCSOs. That's an awful lot of people to leave in 3 months. So it's kind of what's going on. If that's a long-term trend, then there's is there concern that there's too high a rate of turnover? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Commissioner, were you able to follow Ian's question?
I followed both of those questions. So I think the first one was around BAME recruitment, and as explained in the report, we are roughly on officers, we're about 5% of the total. Warwickshire's last census gave us the figure of about 7.2% BAME communities across the country. So we're a little bit below, but we're quite close, and we are confident that the new batch of recruits that are coming in, there will be a larger section of BAME recruits. And this isn't because there's been any positive discrimination, it's because the positive actually have been encouraged minority communities to apply to become a police officer and go through the recruitment process. So I don't know when we will get up to 7.2, but I think we are moving in that direction. Come back in after I've answered the second question, if I sort of said what you wanted me or asked me to. Interestingly, on the number of staff and officers leaving, we lose about 60 to 70 officers a year. Principally, they retire. As you all know, officers who've been in the force for some time have a 30-year career, and then they retire on the full pension. And that is nearly all of the 60 to 70 officers that retire every year. So I'm not alarmed by that figure of 17. But the police staff, there's a slightly bigger turnover. Actually, we are about 10% BAME communities in our police staff, so well above the county average. And if we put all of the employers, all 2,000 of the employers together, we are actually over the 7.2%, which is obviously gratifying to be able to say to the communities we serve that we do represent them within the police force and the personnel within the police force. There's a high turnover with police staff, as always. I mean, some of the police staff are doing detective jobs, some are working in our control room, others are obviously in our teams to do with finance and HR and others. There's been quite a turnover, plainly, and quite a big new recruitment because of the standalone situation after the alliance with West Mercia. So I'm happy about those figures. Has that answered your question, Ian?
It answers the second one. Thank you very much. The first one was also about retention for BAME, and it was that the second table was only about officers and not staff. So it would be helpful to have the 5-year figures, the reasons for leaving for them, for staff and PCSOs as well.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable question. I mean, I haven't got the figures in front of me. If Dave Patterson on the call, could you just confirm we will provide those to the next panel meeting?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm on the call. We can see what we can do, and we're reliant on the force for those figures. But I also remind everybody that we've been in alliance with West Mercia for a number of years, and actually trying to sort out the figures from that sort of collective pool of people may be nigh impossible. But we'll put it to the force, and we can see what we can do. But there is a performance accountability meeting coming up next Tuesday, where this issue is going to be one of the subjects that we're going to be deep diving with the Chief Constable. So hopefully we get a bit more clarity for you on that matter.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay, thank you, David. Ian, do you have anything to follow up on before I move over to Sarah?
No, that's great on this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, would you like to raise your question?
Yeah, thanks. Morning, Philip. Just wanted to ask why. I've got two questions as well, but the burning question I've got is we've got all these new officers that are being recruited, and of course they need mentoring quite carefully in order to become experienced and good officers. And what I need from you really is some details as to how many sort of uniformed officers are out there on the beat, as it were, with our sort of more junior constables, because and also, why have we got such old figures? This is January to March and it's now September, so we could do another. I would have thought these figures came out 4 times a year, so we probably should have had about the third lot here. Could we have some more up-to-date figures, please?
Okay, Sarah, which page? Just put me to the page of the report you're referring to.
Yeah, it's the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion report. We're still on that, which is
yeah, it's still the same. Okay, on page 21. Sorry, not page 21, page 19. Yeah, I mean, plainly, I get updated figures, total figures, to do with those who've left and those who've joined on a monthly basis, and we'll be getting the updated figures next Tuesday. I mean, I think that the information the panel wanted was a little bit more detailed, so there was a lot of work has gone into actually those figures on in those two tables on page 19, and those are the latest figures we've got. Perhaps can I refer to Dave again? Do we know when we might get the second quarter figures of June?
Yeah, again, reliant upon the force, but just the information of the members of the panel. At the moment, the assurance and service improvement team are creating a framework for diversity and inclusion as well. So at the moment, they're just sort of scoping what information is out there, what information do we need to gather, and that's going to be reported at the meeting with the Chief Constable on Tuesday as well. So it is work in progress at this moment in time, but what we are keen to actually ascertain is across the whole arena of diversity and inclusion, what the position is with the force. So in terms of the data that you requested, I think we'll wait till Tuesday to see what the force are intending to provide, and then we can take it from there if there are any gaps in the information.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sarah, does that answer any issues that you've had?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still mindful of experienced officers with new officers and the ratio that are on the streets. That's what I really would like to know, and I know that our residents would like to know that as well.
Okay.
Your point there being, Sarah, that the traditional system of police training is not purely classroom based. It is about the demonstration and handing over experience. So as you lose experienced officers, it becomes far harder to train good officers who are new recruits and probation. Is the point you make, yes?
Indeed it is, Dave. Thanks very much for bailing me there. Thank you very much, Steve.
That's all right. Philip?
David Riley, I see that Neil Hewison, my Chief Executive, has requested to come in on this, so if he could talk.
Yeah, please, Neil. Welcome.
Morning, everyone. Just to pick up the point that Sarah's raising, just as a means of reassurance, really, to the wider panel, yes, we've had a huge influx of new officers, and they are all, without exception, being tutored on the response shifts across the force. So what we have now is a kind of a huge increase in response officers. All of the new people are being tutored in on that team, and actually the force is still following the guidelines for the training and development of new officers. So it has been a challenge. The demand on the tutors has been significant, but the force are managing to continue to provide meaningful tutorage and development for the young officers. So what we're finding now is the complexion of the response teams is becoming very young in age and service, and that glut of new officers, which is very welcome, will just need to work their way through the system over the next 2 to 3 years. But they are getting the support from senior colleagues, experienced colleagues, to ready them for completion of their probation period, if that helps.
Yeah, and just to explain to Sarah, when recruits come in, they go through the selection processes. They then have a 17-week training period with the force, and that's carried out. Was at Stuart Ross House. It's now just moved back to Leek Wootton, but they're not proper experienced officers until they've done that if you like, that sort of theoretical part, and then the practical part being mentored how to on patrol. And these are the national guidelines, and I'm sure the force are complying with those.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Do you have a response?
I continue to be alarmed at the age and experience of the response teams. That is fact of life, and those are the ones that the public need and see in their darkest moment of need. Thank you. I have no further questions, just that statement. Thank you.
Can I suggest, Chairman, that perhaps Sarah asked that question of the Chief Constable? They're his teams, and he visits them a lot more than I do and understands the whole process of mentoring and tutoring. So I would suggest that might be a question you could ask the Chief Constable later on.
Yeah.
We will do. Thanks, Commissioner. I mean, I fundamentally support the point that Sarah is making here. We know that critical incident decision making and best evidence processes are fundamental skills for response officers. You attend a serious incident. How that incident is dealt with in the first 10 minutes determines whether it is resolved immediately or whether it turns into a full ongoing criminal inquiry, which could take years. I think that at this stage, if we could note the fact that the panel have some concerns about the age demographic of response officers, if it is as Neil has reported, that we are talking about a cohort of people who are young in service, because that has to be an efficiency consideration for Warwickshire Police. To attend serious crimes, the golden hour is actually, as we all know, it's actually 10 minutes, but the golden hour is fundamental. So we would be interested in anything that you might report back to us in efficiency terms about how we are ensuring that the force properly deal with the golden hour.
Yeah, just to sort of finalise from my end, actually, of the 216 new officers who joined us, 53, I think it is, are transferees from other forces with considerable experience. And included in that are a number of firearms officers, and you will remember in the past we were short on firearms officers, we're now up to speed. And the other good bit of news on response that has happened since the Alliance, we now have control room inspectors in Warwickshire. Up till the end, at the end of the Alliance, they were all at Kinglip in Worcestershire. And I think that the local response and decision making now is much improved.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Commissioner, if we could just log that as an action then, please, for you to just come back and give us some feedback at the next meeting on your confidence around efficiency and effectiveness for how Warwickshire Police are able to deal with the golden hour for critical incidents that are attended by response officers. That would be fantastic. And totally
I think that's fair. But of course, if we're recruiting new officers, which we have been, some of them will be inexperienced. So this balance, you're absolutely right. We need to make sure they're properly trained and equipped to do the job that we ask them to do.
Okay, thank you. I can now see some hands. So I've got Jenny, and now I've got Sarah with it. Sarah's just taking. Is your hand up again, Sarah?
I'm taking it down, Dave.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. You have a question.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Morning, Philip. You mentioned the enhancement of SNT taking place. As an elected member, and I think along with other elected members, we do need to have information about the upgrading and replacement and changes in SNTs and their contact details. I'm not aware that we've had any information to elected members of the teams, how they've changed, and very importantly, their contact details. I think I did ask this question some time ago, and I'd like to know where we are on that, please.
Okay, good question. I mean, safe and neighbourhood teams are a really important part of the police forces engaging and, if you like, solving problems with partners in the county. We currently have 32 safe and neighbourhood teams, which I'm keen to see remain. Some forces, like I think I've told you this before, like Norfolk, have abolished completely their safe and neighbourhood teams and all their PCSO. I would not like to see that happening in Warwickshire. Plainly, the Chief Constable has the resources and decides how they are deployed. So it's not my decision as to how big or small safe and neighbourhood teams are. But I do constantly push the force to make sure that, firstly, safe and neighbourhood team officers and PCSOs spend time in talking to elect members, partners, schools, other businesses and other organisations on their patch. And I also actually encourage elected members to engage and talk and report to their safer neighbourhood teams. And actually, sadly, I often go to, well, not at the moment, but I have been going out to there was one last week online where a parish council did not know the names of their safer neighbourhood team. They hadn't invited them to a meeting for 3 years. And that's not good partnership working. So this is a joint thing, Jenny. I mean, in Stratford, where you are, I mean, there's now the new patrol team. There is a good and efficient safer neighbourhood team, and other safer neighbourhood teams are actually based in Stratford. And I feel you're reasonably well covered. And whilst I'm on Stratford, I hope you've noticed that the roof has been done.
Yes.
We're hoping that will be finished in October, and I hope that sends a message to the communities that Warwick Police is there to stay in central Stratford and will not be moving, as some of the rumours I have heard.
May I just follow that up, Chair? Because my issue is that there are changes in the neighbourhood. We do try. I do keep in touch with PCSOs and other members, because when we have issues arising, it's quite useful that an elected member who has the residents giving them the issues, that we need to get in touch with the police to actually follow those issues up. What I'm saying is, can you just send out every 3 months an update, pictures, who our neighbours, safer neighbourhood team is, pictures and their contact details. We need to have those at hand so that we can actually keep the flow of information going as we need to.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of ways of keeping in touch with safer neighbourhood teams. We have a really good one down here in Shipston that send out regular newsletters with information, with intelligence. Neighbourhood watch teams in villages and towns are good vehicles for engagement on all of this. But yeah, I don't know whether, David, have we got all of our safer neighbourhoods teams now online and contactable with photographs and names? I would add that quite a lot of PCSOs like to become police officers, so that's one of the reasons they move on, but they do stay within the organisation. And of course, the posting of officers for safer neighbourhood teams is an operational matter for the Chief Constable. Dave, there any information on safer neighbourhood teams contacting their residents?
Yeah, in terms of that direct contact, not really. I mean, it's a matter for the force. But I would say is that when we had Warwickshire had its own website, it was far more informative. But we've now moved to single online homes. And there is a website called police.uk, and if you put your postcode in there, then it should bring up all your safer neighbourhood teams with the contact details as well. And I think that's probably the best portal to actually go to get that up-to-date information. I'm hoping it's current, but it's a matter for the force to ensure that. It's certainly a question that we can ask to make sure that it is current and accurate.
Okay, Dave, I would be very grateful if you take Jenny's point up. When we discussed this, we have agreed that sharing contact details for the neighbourhood teams, both in hard copy and in line, because we are conscious that some people are not internet savvy, will be really good. Parish councils especially value those contacts that Philip has referred to, and appreciating it's a challenge, it still is a good sign of efficiency to make sure that for the neighbourhood teams, at least everybody knows who their local points of contact are and can feel as though they're able to build a relationship with them. I have Peter Gilbert, and then Jenny, I still have your hand raised.
Me, Chair. I kind of support what Councillor Fredley said about the information and sharing, but I think there also needs a more formalised relationship as well, because I've had experiences where the PCSOs have been, the relationship I have with them fantastic, and I've also had where it's not, and not for any other reason than possibly personalities and so on, and the fact that politicians are sometimes viewed with contempt by people does affect how the working of a relationship moves forward. School governors and school head teachers can help or not, because they might not like your political persuasion, and I think that sometimes has happened with my relationship with some of the PCSOs, and I think we need to make sure that they realise that we're all there to assist the community. So I think there is a much more formal approach needs to be taken by this. Is actually you're going into an area, you may have an existing councillor or multiple existing councillors. You need to access them and go and see them and build a relationship with them. Because sometimes when you try and do it from your own bat, it can be affected by personalities. And I've had that experience. Not my own, I know my personality is terrible, but I'm avuncular enough to just get on with the job. But I have met hostility on occasion purely because of a preconceived idea. And that does not help a community one iota.
I'd agree with that, Mr. Chairman. Any elected member is elected by their residents and should be treated exactly the same as any other member. Peter, if you want to send me any examples of those offline, I will look into it.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Jenny, I still see your hand raised.
I'm sorry, Chair, I have actually lowered it.
That's okay, that's no worries. Commissioner, we have one more question just on this diversity issue, unless it's already been addressed. Maggie, did you have anything you wanted to say to the Commissioner, or have we managed to cover the point you were raising? Maggie, we can't hear anything from you, so unless you're muted, I'll move on. Okay, nothing heard from Maggie. Commissioner, can I now take you to your draft annual report, please? And specifically, I'd like to take you to what's page 8 in your draft report and page 30 in the document pack. It's the issue around national responsibilities.
Yeah.
Derek, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Morning, Philip.
Morning.
National responsibilities is the Blue Light Limited or Commercial Limited Company. As you are a member of the Blue Light Limited Company, are you in receipt of any financial gain?
Right, I can answer that. I've been appointed one of the 5 PCC directors of the Blue Light Commercial Limited Company. There are no allowances, salaries, wages, payments at all. This is done within. If you like, all PCCs have to take on a national responsibility, and this is the one I've been asked to do, which I am doing. And the company is now established. It's actually based in Birmingham, which is quite good news for Warwickshire. The head office will be there. And with all the regional directors now appointed, at the moment it's fully funded by the Home Office. And the idea is that the amount of savings that can be done through joint procurements and other they've been very heavily involved with PPE, the NPASIA, the National Police Air Service. The very first topic being considered at the moment is actually about fleet and buying cars. I mean, we have about 400 vehicles in Warwickshire, so you can imagine how many thousands of vehicles there are nationally. So this is a good thing to do, and I found it very interesting, and I will of course be making sure that Warwickshire benefits from all those joint procurements that are suggested.
Thank you. And just to follow up, as you're a member, do you have to register your interests locally, like we have to if we've got an interest in it as a local councillor?
Well, in what respect, Derek?
You know, if you've got an interest or you're getting paid for something, you have to register your interest in the local book at the council. Do you have one in the local register?
Yeah, I do. And on the PCC website is a complete list of my interests. I hope this is on there, but I've only just been appointed a director. If I'm not, I will be. But I don't receive any remuneration at all for this.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Derek. Philip, can I just confirm then, because obviously the title limited and conversations about it being a company has caused a little bit of confusion amongst panel members. So just to confirm what I think I heard you say, this isn't a salaried post. It is a commercial company, but the company exists to ensure that police and crime commissioners nationally get the best benefit in terms of purchasing as opposed to benefit personally from contracts and all the rest of it.
Yeah, that's fair. The company is owned by the PCCs, the 43 PCCs, and I think the Mayor of London and the Mayor of Manchester and any others who sort of carry out PCC duties. The board, from memory, is 9 people, of which 5 are PCCs. So PCCs control the board. I think there are 2, also on the board, there are 2 non-executive directors who have been recruited, 2 chief constables, and the chief executive. So PCCs have 5 out of the 9, and will be able to control and understand and point this business in the right direction. But the Home Office are fully behind it. As I said, our funding, I think it's the first 2 years of its existence to get it off the ground.
Thank you for that. I think that you've clarified the concerns or the interest that the panel had. Members, can I ask if anybody has any other concerns about the Blue Light Commercial Limited? That's nothing heard, thank you. Commissioner, I can take you forward now into the document pack to your performance report, which is at page 164 of the document pack, but is actually page 4 on the Police and Crime Panel Performance Scrutiny Report.
Yep.
Ian, you have a question about Operation Spigot.
I do, and Phil, Commissioner, in your introduction, you said something which I haven't quite followed. The questions, if I've understood this right, so the numbers are all very difficult for me. Are we on page 4 of Appendix B, which is page 164 or page 94 on the electronic version? We've got 3 different page numbers here. Question 2 was, what was the outcome of Operation Spigot? Are there plans to replicate? And it mentions South Leamington Spa, which, as you know, I represent, and there have been a number of incidents of great concern. So there are about 4 questions in here. One is, I think part of the answer on that is later on, because I understand it, that's a question you raised, and that the presumably the Chief Constable has answered on what is page 104 of our document pack, which is page 172 on the printed version, which is saying many things that it's gone really well, but it doesn't say if it will be rolled out in Leamington or elsewhere. So that's my main question. It sounds as if it's gone well. Will it be rolled out further? But while I'm on this issue about violence and particularly drug-related, also it's mentions in the performance scrutiny about expanding problem-solving model, which our trustee chair says is something that's happened many times before, but I'd be interested to know if it's not working everywhere, what's the ability to replicate that? That's a bit of a long question. I hope you followed it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just interject then. So can we deal with the Operation Spigot question first? Because let's just try and bring a bit of structure to those that are trying to follow it on the papers. So page 164, Violent Crime and Drugs, Operation Spigot. And Ian, your question was, is this model of good practice being rolled out elsewhere?
Okay, this all came out of the report to do with violent, particularly violent without injuries, and looking at hotspots in Warwickshire. And you'll see there that there's Atherstone in North Warwickshire Borough, Warwick and Leamington in Warwick District, and of course Rugby. And Rugby was chosen, I think, for the first pilot of Operation Spigot, which was specific teams and surveillance and other matters to, first of all, try and find out what is happening with regard to to crime in rugby, particularly with offensive weapons, and secondly, then to work out a plan with our partners as to how to address that to reduce the numbers of residents carrying, particularly in this case, carrying knives around rugby. Now, this is a good thing to do. It's obviously fairly resource intensive, and it was decided to do the pilot in rugby, and I think, from what I understand, it's gone pretty well. But South Leamington, Ian, you're quite right, is another area where there have been some extremely serious crimes carried out leading to fatalities, and I know, because of my postback, that the residents of South Leamington are concerned and feel they want more protection. So I think that what is probably new, David, is that I think there's now much more joint working with other organisations. Actually, those registered social housing landlords like Orbit, Warwick District Council in the case of Leamington, and others, mental health, the National Health Service, GPs, CCGs, they all have a responsibility to keep our residents safe, and I think we need to work closely and more in tandem to try and solve some of these problems. And actually, somebody carrying a knife, all sorts of people are involved in trying to reduce that. And I think that schools, parents, all sorts of different types of people have a responsibility to try and reduce this crime that's happening on our streets. And do we really know why a youngster carries a knife? Do we really understand why they have the need to do that? I'm not sure that we do as a society. And all of us on this call have I think we have a duty to do something about this, because it is not the way that we want to see our young residents going. And of course, the sad thing is that a lot of the people who are carrying knives are actually vulnerable. They often have maybe had learning difficulties at school. There may be children who have been in care, and it's not easy. It is not easy, but I think we owe them a duty to make sure that the tightrope they're walking between being a perpetrator and being a victim is very tight and small, and we need to make sure that they veer onto the side, away from being either of those, to being a responsible member of society. But I mean, we could have a whole meeting on this, Ian. It's tragic. I mean, if you want any of the specific details about Operation Spigot, can I once again suggest that you ask the Chief Constable later on?
Ian, do you have a follow-up question for the Commissioner about Spigot?
On that one, yes, thank you for all those words. Those are excellent. The basic question is, will it be rolled out to Leamington Spa or anywhere else?
Well, the answer is I don't know the answer to that question. I hope so.
Okay, thank you much indeed. Does anybody else have any questions on the PCC's performance report, which is Appendix B? I didn't know anything.
David Patterson has got his hand up, Chair.
David.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment regarding Operation Spigot. Just from the local news in Leamington, they had Operation Switch, which took place in August, where they made 8 drug arrests. That was led by the local SMT, whether it was Spigot in name or in method, but there's certainly been some activity in South Leamington regarding drug arrests, which seems to have a great deal of success as well. But clearly, a question for the Chief Constable later, but I thought I'd add that as well.
Okay, thank you, David. Colleagues, I propose to move on to Appendix C, which is page 173 of the document pack, and Appendix C is Warwickshire Police's performance scrutiny report for 2020-2021. On page 173, there is a section about the Forces problem-solving model, which is the third paragraph from the bottom of the page 173. Ian, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. I did ask it first of all, but it got swallowed up in Spigot, so apologies for confusing the two things there. Again, it's on the same topic. I like what you were saying about integrating things and trying to work carefully to tackle these. Can you say any more about this problem-solving model to tackle county lines and rolling it out more? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, county lines is a scourge, and I'm sure you're all aware this is organised crime groups, often not resident in Warwickshire, but trying to establish drug dealing lines and, if you like, trying to get our population to buy into the whole project and then indeed become dealers and couriers themselves. So this is a horrific assault, I think, on our population, often from people outside. So there are a number of things that are being done about this. Firstly, we are working much closer with the regional organised crime unit, which is based in the West Midlands. We are part funders of it. Some officers are seconded into it. It is a growing organisation, and it's actually had some really good success recently to intercepting county lines criminals and participants, and a number of arrests and charges have been brought, which is good news. So there has to be a joined-up police response, and actually they don't all come from Birmingham. We have county line gangs coming out of Liverpool, coming out of London, coming out of Bristol. This is a national problem, and actually because we're in Warwickshire at the centre of the motorway network, with I think we've got 5 or 6 motorways running through us, more miles than any other police force, the access to our communities through that motorway network for drug dealing and county lines operatives, I suspect, is attractive. We also have a number, to them that is, not to us, we also have a number of fairly diverse communities, and I don't think county lines is necessarily targeted at deprived areas. I think it comes into the wealthier areas that I live around just as much as it does in urban Nuneaton or Rugby. So this is a massive problem for the police. It is takes up a huge amount of resource, and I just add again, Ian, that the ability to stop this happening cannot just rest with the police. They do not have the resource or the intelligence or the influence on organisations to be able to stop this by themselves. So I personally have encouraged, I've encouraged the fire service, I've encouraged the mental health services, ambulance, CCGs, as a list I read out before, to let's be looking for the possible victims of county lines. Let's all be aware and have a joined up approach to try to research on our society, and particularly the younger residents, and particularly those who are perhaps in the upper part of schools in Warwickshire and in the secondary schools. So lots to be done. It's a battle that we have to keep winning skirmishes and eventually try and win the war, but it's going to take some time. I don't know whether either Neil or Dave Patterson want to come in on that.
David, you have your hand up?
I'll offer a comment if that's helpful, panel. Just on to kind of embellish what Philip has just said, to put a local flavour to this, you're all aware of the SOCJAG approach that the county follows, which has been re-energised in the last 6 months, led by a senior member from Warwickshire County Council with our support. It's become a lot more focused and bringing kind of multi-agency interventions to deal with some of these particularly tricky serious organised crime, county lines type issues. I keep an overview of this. One of my team is central to the SOCJAG process, and there's a lot of work carrying on now in relation to trying to divert particularly young people away from the county lines activity. And I believe that the direction of the overall forum now has got an operational arm and then a multi-agency arm, and it's all wrapped up together and is being led very effectively by Jonathan from the County Council with our support. So that is an area that is continuing to develop. It was good practice anyway, formally identified by the HMIC FRS, and it's just been during the COVID time we've taken the time to reflect on how it was operating and have decided to reinvigorate it in a different format, but I think a more effective format to deliver meaningful outcomes in the communities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Neil. Ian, does that answer your initial question around county lines and problems?
That's very helpful. If I may, I'll just get some details from Neil afterwards because I'd like to know more. Thank you very much.
Okay, and Neil, thank you for the explanation. I've got Nicola Davis with a hand up.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question relating to the performance scrutiny report around repeat victimisation and domestic abuse. Obviously, organisations like the MASH have been having to operate remotely during the last sort of 4 or 5 months. And that's compounded by pressures, financial and other people in quite constrained domestic circumstances. I just wondered if you can give us an assurance that those support services around domestic abuse victims are operating as fully as they can be and will be over the next coming 6 months, where some of those pressures may well be increasing again in households.
I can, Nicola. Domestic abuse repeat victimisation is horrific, and it is. I'm pleased that those victims of domestic abuse perhaps have now a bit more courage and confidence in the system to come and report those crimes. And actually, organisations like Crime Stoppers have been really helpful in this way. You can report something anonymously, but it's taken seriously and goes straight into the control room in Leawood. Yes, we have since particularly to do with COVID, it is obviously on everyone's radar that there is the potential there for the increase of domestic abuse when people are locked up or locked down, should I say. There has been a big message has gone out to all those officers who intermingle with the public to look out for the signs of domestic abuse. We've spent a lot of time encouraging victims to report. I think in the past there has been a dearth of those victims reporting the crime, which doesn't help all those agencies trying to help them to get it. Victims, we've given out more money to domestic abuse victim crime organisations, Bernardo's and Rosa, Intervention Service, Safeline, are all organisations you would have heard of. And we have given them not only the usual grants to undertake their work, but we've given them supplementary grants to be able to do things in a different way during COVID and sort of any gaps they had, they'd be able to plug. We've also been recruited into the county 4 new IDVAs, I think they're called, independent advisors to do with abuse, and they are being sort of subsumed into those charities that I've mentioned. So we're not going to do enough on domestic abuse, but we're doing a lot more than we have, and I do believe that the COVID crisis has actually put a spotlight on domestic abuse, which is a good thing, and I think it's brought more people to report it. That is a good thing. Doesn't help on crime stats. I understand that, but it's a really good thing that people are prepared to report and engage with the police and other organisations as well, who the police can refer them to. So I don't think that, interestingly, I don't think that the figures have spiked dramatically, but I think there has been a gradual increase of reporting, and a lot of effort is going into that.
Okay,
anything to that? I think Neil does.
Yes, Neil, you had a point to add.
Thank you, Chair. Just building on the comments that Philip has just made, I think the panel will be interested in what we've done in relation to the forces' response to this issue that you've raised, Nicola. So I commissioned a review of the police's response to domestic abuse and vulnerability during COVID. It was led by our new arrival, Richard Long, who's formerly Detective Superintendent in charge of vulnerability, so he's absolutely perfect person to carry out that review. He interviewed key individuals across the force and produced a very comprehensive report, and it focused on all of the concerns that we've all had around, how are the police going to respond when there's lockdown, how are we going to make sure that the police effectively manage the risk, how's the force going to manage, ongoing risk to repeat victims, how are we going to ensure that, they get the support they require from the support agencies and specialists. That report was compiled, and it formed the basis of a deep dive we had with the Chief Constable and his senior team. Can't remember when that was, but it was certainly about 4 to 6 weeks ago. And the force provided detailed reassurance around the force's response to COVID. So that was a really helpful thing, and I think that shows that we've tried to discharge our holding to account duties during the pandemic. Added to which, just to build on what Philip said about funding, we've actually successfully secured funding, national funding, from the Ministry of Justice and Home Office to provide this additional support, and it was significant funding for a small force. One of the streams of funding, I think we were only one of 7 or 8 forces that was granted it. So we put in some significant bits for funding, which has brought additional cash into the county. So we've not only got additional IDVAs, we have additional ISVAs, independent sexual violence advisors, and our ongoing COVID recovery fund, which has also been launched by the Commissioner during the pandemic, is looking to continue to support all of those agencies who have a real central role to play in supporting victims of not only domestic abuse, but physical abuse, sexual abuse, drugs and alcohol abuse. So I think we've been really busy in that space over the last 4 to 6 months. And I'm really pleased with what we've managed to deliver as a team, and hopefully that reassures the panel that we've been very active in this space to ensure that the pandemic has not left people who are really vulnerable at further risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Chairman, I think Sarah Ansell's got her hand up as well, who's my treasurer, isn't it?
Okay, thank you. If we can just see if Nicola has a follow-up question to yourself or Neil, because there's been quite a lot of information passed there. Nicola, do you have a follow-up question, or are you happy for Sarah to speak?
I'm happy, and I'm pleased to have had such a comprehensive response, and to see that the Commissioner and his team have been so proactive on this as an issue. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. The only thing that I just wanted to add, I think most of what I was going to say, Neil, is probably covered, but the additional funding that we have secured as an OPCC is around 470,000. So, and that will be split across providing those 4 additional ISVAs and IDVAs, but also some support arising due to COVID for victims of domestic abuse and sexual abuse. So it is quite a significant sum. Totaling 470,000 across the county.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Colleagues, does anybody else have anything that they want to raise in relation to the discussion we've just had around domestic abuse and protecting vulnerable people? Nicola, you're still broadcasting with your microphone. No, I don't hear any other questions or see any hands raised. Commissioner, just 2 points from me, if you don't mind. First of all, I welcome the work that your office is doing with Warwickshire County Council. It's just to make the point that, as you know, as one of the 4 chairs of the Community Safety Partnerships, or the 5 chairs across Community Safety Partnerships across Warwickshire, we continue to have an interest in what the statutory authority of the Safe Warwickshire Board is, because it is not a partnership. So I appreciate I might be pulling hairs, but at the moment we still don't consider it to be a community safety partnership under the terms of the Crime and Disorder Act. So congratulations with your work, but please don't forget us. And then the second element is just to ask a question, and I promise you I'm not being mischievous, but I do consistently see that ex-Warwickshire officers are working in your office and then reviewing Warwickshire interventions. Now, to a degree, it might raise a question about are people marking their own homework, and raise a question about one's own ability to take an independent critical view of a project you have very much personally been involved in. Now, that is not for one moment to be seen as any criticism of anybody's professional competence or capability. It's just the issue about the ability to step outside and look back at something that you have lived and invested your skills in. Are you happy that you have that degree of independence?
Okay, well, there's a couple of points there, David. Yeah, the CSP, the Warwickshire Safety Partnership, my office, the force. It's a sort of complicated web of lines between all the various organisations. For what it's worth, I think the Warwickshire Safety Partnership has no money. It is not a decision-making body, but it is a really good place to promote ideas. And actually, the Chief Fire Officer, as you know, is promoting this tri-serve role as a pilot, and he did that through the Warwickshire Safety Partnership, and that was exactly the right place to do it, as well as through the Blue Light Collaboration Board in Warwickshire, which I chair. Community safety partnerships are an important part of my business. It is, if you like, dispensing decisions and money locally within those community safety partnerships. Always very interested, and indeed we monitor, as you know, and evaluate your schemes and how you spend the money, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of really good initiatives that are funded through community safety partnerships, which we may not know essentially that even exist. So pleased with that. Makeup of the office, I think I'm right in saying I've got 4 ex-police officers out of 12 at the moment. As you're well aware, my chief executive is leaving. That will be reducing from a third down to a quarter. He's leaving in January, and indeed our replacement is not an ex-police officer for chief executive, if that helps you. I mean, some PCCs are ex-police officers themselves, which are not. So I think the degree of challenge is appropriate and proportionate. And actually, Neil mentioned Richard Long, who was an ex-chief superintendent. He headed up the vulnerability part of the force, and I feel that we are stronger and better knowledge and better to challenge with a few ex-police officers. But I think you're absolutely right that you should not have a complete slate of ex-police officers as a PCC holding the force to account. So I'm happy with the balance. It's personal opinion what's right, but I think we've got the right balance in Warwickshire.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Commissioner. Colleagues, I intend to move on to the agenda item number 6. I'm conscious that we do have the Chief Constable who has joined us. Deb, you have some questions from from independent member Andy Davis.
I do indeed, Chair. They are on the annual review of the Police and Crime Commissioner. I'll just read them out as they're written. So in the annual review, the Commissioner mentions his COVID supplement, which he describes as an evolving document. Mr Davis would like to know how it has evolved over recent months and how the Commissioner envisages it evolving over the coming months, given the recent announcements about us living with the virus for 6 months or more. And then there's also a section on engagement, where the Commissioner outlines the public priorities engagement work undertaken earlier in the year. And Mr Davis would like to know how that will be used given the changing profile of crime that's been reported elsewhere, and whether it will be updated as people's priorities could have shifted to reflect the changing world we are now living in.
Thank you, Deb. Philip,
Okay.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
I think so. I think so. The first is about the COVID plan. That COVID plan was, if you like, an addendum to the police and crime plan. So it followed the principles of the police and crime plan, adapting them to the situation we find ourselves in, which is obviously this virus. I see that as a flexible, organic document that will change as this pandemic changes. And let's face it, we don't know what we're in for in the next few months. Anything can happen. And I think it was the right thing to try and draw out the principles of the plan and apply them to the COVID situation, which is what it was about. And can you still hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can still hear you, Philip. You're breaking up.
Right.
We can hear you.
I've got something on the screen. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think
there it is. That's what I said before. An evolving document. Of course, we will be constantly refreshing and updating it. And I think it's a really helpful document for our partners to understand what we're doing. I hope that, obviously, if anyone can read it, there's a link there to be able to read it fully if you wish. The other point was about engagement, which is, and I see that's on the screen as well, thank you very much. Plainly, engagement work has been pretty well curtailed, certainly big public meetings and meeting lots of members of the public at once. But what I would say is that our postbag has nearly doubled. That is a form of engagement and emails coming in. I've now attended quite a few virtually. And as I mentioned earlier on, I was at one earlier this week on Monday evening, and I am very happy to engage with the authorities, with our partners, as much as we possibly can. But if there's one frustrating thing for my job and being able to carry out my job under the lockdown and COVID restrictions, is actually the inability to engage properly. It's frustrating. We're working through it. I think most people now are fairly savvy with virtual meetings, and I think we're still doing the work. But I would say that our postbag has doubled, and the amount of communications we're getting in from the public are all very relevant to the current situation. I don't know if there's any other detailed question, Dave, but I think that probably answers it.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. I am conscious I did see Neil waving. Neil Houston.
Thank you, David. It's just before we move off into the Chief Constable session, I was just going to raise something on behalf of Philip, and it's particularly around the effort and kind of commitment that David Patterson has shown in pulling together the annual report. As you can see, it's a fairly lengthy, detailed report, and I'd just like to kind of register my thanks to David, who's brought it to the panel in draft form for you to peruse and amend as you see fit. But I just wanted to formally recognise the work that David done in producing that report.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And as a panel, when we went through the report in the pre-meet, and also when we obviously read it with the case papers, we share your comments. David, congratulations. The panel has had some exceptionally good reports from you in the past. Clearly, your experience as a Warwickshire police officer has added to the quality of those reports and the understanding you displayed. So, from my position as chair, I think it's first class, David. Thank you very much indeed. And on that matter, Commissioner, I don't think we have any feedback to give you other than the question we had at the limited company. So, members, just to tidy this one up, does anybody have anything that they want to offer back to the PCC's office, perhaps through a phone call or an email outside this meeting about the nature of the report, or are we happy to support the draft? Commissioner, I take my colleague's silence as a thanks to you for sharing the draft with us, and please do go ahead and publish it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, you're muted.
Colleagues, the Chief Constable is back with us again, so I just propose to fly through the outstanding agenda items. We talked about the recruitment of the independent panel member at item 5 in the pre-meet. Does anybody have any comment, or are we happy to note and move on? No, thank you. We talked about the work programme, which is agenda item number 6 in the pre-meeting discussion. Philip, there is only one, and I'll ask Deb to contact you and pick that up, and that is, we have the discussion about the BAME representation and the forces diversity approach. We would be grateful for a presentation from the forces PAT team, just picking up on some of those conversations that we raised with you, if you think that is appropriate at our next meeting. Again, a nice, short, succinct presentation from those members of Warwickshire Police staff supporting the work of PAT would be valued by the panel.
Yeah, I would be supportive of that. I see Martin Jones is now on the screen. I think it's a reasonable request to ask Chief Inspector Clarence Chissy and others to do a short presentation, but it's not my decision that they come. It's yours, Martin. Would you be happy with that?
Yes, sorry, I missed the first bit. What's it on, Philip?
On the PAT team, positive action.
Positive action, yeah. Force would be delighted to update on that, and I can certainly probably give 1 or 2 highlights today if there's any questions on it.
Thank you, Chief Constable. We'll drop you a briefing note. We've had quite an extensive discussion about the forces BAME representation, particularly around the number of levers for police staff as well as police officers. So our support officer, Deb Mosley, will drop you a quick note, and it would be great to see your colleagues at the next meeting.
Great, no problem.
Panel members, dates of the next meeting are published on the agenda under item 7. Does anybody have any issues with any of those? No? And then we move to agenda item number 8, which is any urgent items. Now, nobody raised any urgent business with me. Can I confirm that that is still the case, that we have no urgent business? Thank you, everybody. I therefore move to agenda item number 9, which is the reports containing confidential or exempt information. Members, I propose to you the following resolution: that members of the public be excluded from the meeting for items mentioned below, which is the report of the Chief Constable, on the grounds that members of the public's presence would involve the disclosure of exempt information as defined by paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A of Part 1 of the Local Government Act of 1972. Members, can I please see by a show of hands your support for that resolution? Jane,
that's passed, Chair.
That's passed. Thank you very much indeed.
Can we stop the live stream? Wait for confirmation that that's been stopped.